Hello and welcome to episode 281 of Stand Up. Joining me today, author and journalist David Daley, talking about how to reform democracy in America. I'm Pete Dominick. Time to stand up with me right now. Well, hello and happy Monday, happy February, and thank you very much for hitting play on this podcast. I know there are so many podcasts to choose from. I am so honored and appreciative that you are listening to Stand Up. I've got a great episode for you today. My guest, David Daley, and I had a wonderful, extremely enlightening conversation about the challenges ahead, the accomplishments that we've made in the past 10 years, and how much more ground we have to gain to restore democracy in America. And it's a fight, I will say, worth having. Here on Sunday evening, as I record this just before 11 p.m., the snow is falling at a rapid pace in the Northeast, and I am wondering, what am I going to do about the driveway? We're supposed to get 10 inches to 2 feet here, and I've got no snowblower. I had an electric one. It conked out because I didn't take good care of it. I'd love to replace it. I don't have one yet. I started thinking about, why can't I just tie a harness with a rope and some kind of a plow blade I could drag behind me, because I love to be out in the cold getting exercise. I really do. I grew up in upstate New York in the snow of Syracuse and the lake effect snow, and I love being out there. My dad is still at 76 out there blowing snow in his oldest jacket and seemingly loving it as well. The ice cubes forming in his nose and mustache, and now me and my beard. I love it. I love being out there, and as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to go out there at like midnight at 1 a.m. and then again 3 hours later and shovel. But why can't I have a harness and be a human snowplow? Is that not an awesome idea? I'm off to YouTube after this to find out what ingenious ideas stupid men have come up with. You know, you can put like a plow on almost any type of a car, so maybe I'll get like a small blade to put on the back of the Honda CR-V and plow the driveway. We have a long driveway in reverse. What do you think? Am I a full idiot? I think I may be. I love the snow. So excited to get out there. They even called tomorrow a snow day for my daughters. I should be at the mountain getting ready to ski, but I didn't prepare that far ahead. And plus COVID. But nonetheless, I love a snow day. I can't wait to be out there with the girls. But also, while I'm talking about myself and my life, something, though, hopefully all of these things relate to you. Maybe not the snow for all of you, but DVDs. What do you do? Spend a lot of time continuing to minimize and declutter our home and all of our space. And I have probably 500 DVDs. What do I do with them? Is there anything worth doing with old DVDs? Several people, when I asked on Twitter, suggested the library. Do they even take them? Because they don't take old books. Although I don't like to get rid of old books. I like to decorate them with them. Maybe I should be decorating with the DVDs. I hate to waste things. If you have any ideas with what I should do with old DVDs, or you want them, let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com, or leave the comments somewhere wherever I'm posting this podcast. And while you're on it, how about you give this podcast a 5-star review on iTunes? Please do that. Thank you. All right, it is the 1st of February. It's Black History Month. What else can I tell you about February? How do you feel about February wherever you live? What does it mean to you? Are you making any new goals, any new choices, any new standards you're going to be setting? I'm working on time management this month. I think I'm working really hard and actually fairly efficiently, but I think I can do better and get more exercise and eat and plan my day better ahead. And that is my goal. Do you have any goals for this month? Think about it. Maybe set one and maybe find someone to help you be accountable for it. I know I've got all of you to bust my chops every Thursday night at 8. For those of you who are subscribers to Stand Up, you can ask me about it and we can make fun of whether or not I've succeeded or failed. And maybe you have some goals that you're setting for February. And looking back at January, a terrible month for January in terms of COVID, setting all kinds of new records. It was the worst month for Florida. I heard that. But we are starting to get vaccinated, and while we are still far behind and losing over 4,000 Americans a day, we might be on the other end of the curve. And we've got millions of Americans, at least with their first inoculation. Many still have to give the other second shot. So confusing and overwhelming to so many people that are trying to get inoculated, and now the mutations. So we all need the best possible public health communication we can find. Where are you finding your best communication, your solutions? How are you helping your parents and folks in categories that can currently get vaccinated find out where and how to get them? Definitely want to talk about that with you during this week at the Thursday Hang and any other way that you want to communicate with me. I really want to help that public health campaign and spread word on how and people can get vaccinated, what they need to know about the vaccinations, and any other questions they have. Dr. Aaron Carroll will be joining me this week. I think we're talking on Wednesday, so that'll air on Thursday. If you have any questions for him, pass them along. All things COVID, vaccination, etc., and so on. All right, let's get to the last 24 hours in terms of news and sound and audio and things that I want to share with you. First of all, I wanted to share this 2-minute clip from Axios. Jonathan Swan reached out to and caught up with the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, and asked him about the insurrection on the Capitol. And he got this very interesting view. This is about 2.5 minutes of interview from Axios on HBO with Jonathan Swan and the president of Ukraine. And I think it's very important to get the view from abroad on how the health of our democracy looks. And another reason why I'm talking to David Daley today on today's podcast. Here it is.
On January 6th, President Trump held a rally and he incited his supporters to storm the United States Capitol to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. I've been thinking about how you must have seen it. How did you feel when you watched that happen in the United States?
We were very shocked. I was very surprised. I could not imagine that something like this was possible in the United States of America. I believe this was a strong blow to democracy of the United States. We are used to seeing in books, in films, in television. We are used to believing that the United States has the ideal democratic institutions, where power is transferred calmly, without war, without revolutions. Power is passed from one presidency to another. We saw it in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we lived through 2 revolutions. We saw it. We understood such things can happen in the world. But that it could happen in the United States, no one expected that. And this says that not everything is ideal. I remember when I was a young person and the entire world watched when September 11th happened. We all remember this. It was some kind of horror. We watched, and you believe it and cannot believe it at the same time, that in the United States, where security is always at such a high level, that something like that can happen.
It sounds like you were profoundly disturbed watching this.
I was very worried. I was very worried. I did not want you to have a coup, shooting, and God forbid loss of life. It is just that after something like this, I believe it would be very difficult for the world to see the United States as a symbol of democracy in the world.
Jonathan Swan on Axios on HBO talking to the president of Ukraine, how they see us. Such an important question. I'll be asking experts about that over the next year for sure. Now let's get to the Sunday shows. I think Chris Wallace is doing great work. I know it's on Fox News Sunday, but I really do think that he deserves to be watched. And he was covering the political tensions on Capitol Hill on Fox News Sunday, and he asked this really important question to Susan Page of USA Today, who I think gave a great answer and a framing of where the Republican Party is. We're all outraged that they believe in conspiracy theories and are the seditionist caucus and supported the overthrow of a democratically elected election and they're more worried about Liz Cheney agreeing with reality. It's absolutely insane. Here it is, Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace talking to USA Today's Susan Page.
Susan, you know, you've got a situation right now where there is more visible outrage inside the GOP over Liz Cheney, a member of leadership, voting to impeach the president, over rather than some of these wild conspiracy theories being espoused by Marjorie Taylor Greene. How serious is this for the GOP, and what can they do about it? I mean, they take her off committees, expel her? What are their options here?
Well, I think you're right. I think it tells you a lot about where the Republican Party is right now, that Liz Cheney is undoubtedly going to face a primary fight the next time she's up for election, that there is at least a possibility that she is going to lose her place in the House leadership because of this vote of conscience she took. While Republicans in private express concern about Marjorie Taylor Greene, not many of them are willing to speak up in public. And the toughest punishment that is being seriously considered is taking her off the Education Committee, which is something I think that probably is not even a slap on the wrist. Doesn't do anything to stop her from espousing views. You know, you think about, there are big wounds on Capitol Hill from the January 6th assault on Congress. That's what you heard from Nancy Pelosi when she was talking to reporters in the clip you played. This is a kind of language we have not heard from Capitol Hill since the Civil War, and it's not over yet.
Oh, no, it's far from over. I think the predictions that the Republican Party is going to go the way of more conspiracy theories are unfortunately right on. We'll see how many people keep following them, if anything changes, but I think it's really important just to mention, I read over the weekend, Alex Jones, who is one of the most influential people in all of media, who, if you don't know, you must know who this guy is, right? He's one of the most famous and horrible people in America, in his personal life and obviously in his professional life. He's one of these guys who said that the Sandy Hook shooting didn't happen and that they were crisis actors. He is just absolutely reprehensible, has been deplatformed in every possible way by Twitter and so much more, yet still very influential. Anyway, the headline at the Wall Street Journal is January 6th rally funded by top Trump donor, helped by Alex Jones, organizers say. Publix supermarkets heiress donated about $300,000 to the event. Far-right conspiracy show host pledged seed money, organizers say. He not only spent some of his own money, but helped bundle funders, including one of the heirs of the Publix grocery store chain, which is very popular down in Florida. I remember when I lived there, and they had the horrifically overpriced cereal. Maybe that's because I was working at Disney World for like $5.60 an hour in 1994. Nonetheless, Alex Jones helped get all this money, and the Publix heiress, this woman, gave $300,000 for the Stop the Steal rally, and this is who we're dealing with now. This is where we are at now. They don't believe in the things that are happening, and they do believe in things that aren't happening. They don't believe in climate change. They do believe that the election was stolen. This is today's Republican Party. And I still think the Sunday shows and the mainstream, a lot of the mainstream kind of corporate media types, including disappointingly Martha Raddatz and the great expert panel, all women, on This Week on ABC. Listen to how they started.
And Congress, Chief White House Correspondent Cecilia Vega, Senior White House Correspondent Mary Bruce, Congressional Correspondent Rachel Scott, and Weekend White House Correspondent Mary Alice Parks. It's great to see all of you this morning. And Cecilia, I want to start with you. I want to start with unity. Unity was the focus of Joe Biden's campaign. The reason he said voters should turn to him, he predicted a GOP epiphany after the election, but the lack of even gaining one Republican vote so far for COVID relief, what does that mean going forward in terms of unifying the country?
Okay, the answer here should be right away to unify the country You need Republican Party to recognize the reality of the outcome of the election and stop selling the big lie. We cannot do anything. We can't take one step forward until they stop telling their supporters and their voters that the election was stolen. Because if you believe the election is stolen, you are going to continually live in a sense of rage and demand justice. The election wasn't stolen. They have to stop with that lie. Till then, there can be no unity. But here is what ABC Cecilia Vega answered instead.
And this is something he campaigned on. It's something that was a huge part of his inaugural speech. It's something we've heard almost every day since he's been in office for the last few days. He said that there would be this epiphany by Republicans if Donald Trump left. He also, on a conference call, told supporters at one point that he would could end up eating his words, but that he believed Republicans essentially would come around. Martha, we may end up seeing the president eating his words on this.
Okay, I'm just picking on this panel. Part of the show is I play other people's conversations. I weigh in on what I would say. This doesn't make them terrible analysts. They make a lot of good points. They do a lot of good reporting, but I do see, and you probably also see, a lot of these kind of false equivalencies. And while it's certainly fair to criticize Joe Biden's optimism about getting Republicans to bend to his will or somehow compromise with them because he had a good relationship with them, yes, I think that can be naive, but did he really believe that, or was he just saying that to try to look good? I mean, the bottom line is, if Republicans don't admit the big lie is just that, a big lie, then it's on them. There's nothing Democrats could possibly do to unify the party if Republicans continue to sell this lie to their supporters. And if it's not framed that way, then I think the person you're listening to is missing the boat, missing the point, and not doing a very good job at analyzing this situation. That's all I'm saying. And anytime you hear that, send it to me and I'll share it on the show and we can analyze it together again. All right, what else do I have for you? Oh, this is pretty good. Conservative commentator pundit Jonah Goldberg was on Fox News, where he's a contributor with Howie Kurtz. He does a show about the media. And Jonah Goldberg criticizes Fox News, who pays him while on Fox News. You got to give him credit to that. I like this answer.
Speaking of Fox, there are liberals at major outlets that are now saying, well, cable operators should drop Fox News, or Fox shouldn't be allowed to exist. Now, we all know they're not talking about the news division, they're talking about certain opinion people whose views, rather than just saying, I think they're wrong and here's why, they want off the air.
Yeah, and I think the idea of bringing back the fairness doctrine is idiotic. I think a lot of these people don't even really understand how the fairness doctrine worked, and that it doesn't really apply to cable anyway. But it's absolutely true that there are people who want to see, Fox nuked from orbit. And I think that's ridiculous. At the same time, it should not be surprising, and you're right to single out the news division as different, but it should not be surprising when people from the opinion division perpetuate lies about the election being stolen, who are more concerned about canceling Liz Cheney than they are about canceling Marjorie Taylor Greene, as you guys talked about a minute ago. This is a problem all over the place, and it's incumbent upon institutions on either side to police their own in responsible ways and turn things down a little bit and not push out misinformation and lies, lest you invite that kind of backlash, which would make everything worse.
I like that response from Jonah Goldberg, and I also agree with him on the fairness doctrine. I wish that we had some kind of way to regulate the way media is so easily able to lie. And there used to be a kind of both sides thing with the fairness doctrine. If you're not familiar with it, look into it. But there'd be no way to bring that back. And I think it's a waste of time to talk about it. If you disagree, and many of you probably do, I'd love to hear from you. But those are my views on the fairness doctrine. I agree with Jonah Goldberg on that and what he said about Fox News, and give him credit for criticizing him, Fox News, who pays him while he's on the network. So. And the final thing I want to play for you is a conversation I had with my daughter, Julia, who is 13. While we were in the car, we went to buy a new television yesterday for the first time in 10 years. We don't watch a lot of TV together, but the fact that but part of that is because our television doesn't really work very well, and it's annoying, and there's always problems with it, and I'm the only one who knows how to figure it out, and so they always have to call me in, whether they're with their friends or Val is alone. And so I finally got a new television, and it's got the Roku thing, which we're trying to figure out. And if you have any advice and ideas on how you use your Wi-Fi smart TV, I'd love to hear from you. But I asked Julia about, and I thought this was really interesting, what she knew of networks and what she thought of TV and cable while we were in the car, and I asked her if I could record it. So I just thought this was interesting. Here's the perspective of a 13-year-old person living in America in 2021. This doesn't make you feel old. And stay for the end. I think it's like 2.5 minutes when I get real absurd, and it's pretty funny. What do you think of when you think of TV? What's on the TV? When you hear that phrase, what's on TV?
Just a big screen with shows you can watch and movies mostly.
And when you watch your screen, are you mostly watching TikTok, YouTube, or something else?
Usually Netflix.
So when you go to turn the TV on, what do you want it to be able to access and do?
Movies, because I don't want to watch my shows downstairs.
So you just want a TV just for movies?
Well, mostly, yeah.
TV shows, series too, maybe?
Oh, and like music. So if we work out down there, we can like play music from the TV.
So Spotify?
Yeah.
So do you want, I'm going to name a few networks, and when I get done talking, you can tell me which ones you like. Do you want like Netflix, Amazon, Hulu?
Yeah, all of them.
You want all of the different ones? HBO?
Sure.
Do you even know what HBO is?
Yeah.
In YouTube?
Yeah.
How do you control YouTube on a TV?
You just use a remote and you go up and down, search. It's the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
You've done that at people's houses?
Yeah.
When you watch a big giant TV, you almost always watching movies and TV shows, like with your family, with your friends?
Yeah.
Do you know what cable TV is?
Nope.
Do you know what MTV is?
No.
Do you know what the home shopping network is?
No.
QVC?
No.
HBO?
Yeah.
TLC?
No.
NBC?
Yeah.
You know NBC?
Yeah.
CBS?
I don't really know about that one.
ABC?
Yeah.
Do you know ABC?
Yeah.
Fox News?
Yeah.
CNN?
Yeah.
MSNBC?
Yeah.
The Balls Network?
Nope.
Black Entertainment Network?
No.
Black Entertainment Television?
No. Oh, yeah, I think so.
Black People Television?
Dad, is that even a thing?
No, I just don't. Hispanic TV?
Dad, I don't think you're making stuff up.
The Asian People Network?
Oh my God.
The Asian People, the APN. You guys don't watch? It's awesome. They got some amazing game shows. Hilarious. A lot of funny obstacle courses, etc. Okay, so I just thought I want to start including conversations with my kids about life and culture. And if they're good, then I'll throw them in. And if not, then I won't. So the perspective of my parents, the perspective of my kids, and always want to have the perspective of Val, my wife, whenever she wants to join me out here in the shed, if you know what I'm saying. And by the way, if you have great conversations with your family members or friends or even arguments, you can send them to me and I can put them on here and share them with other people. This podcast, we can do anything we want with it, as long as I think the rule for me is that we're learning from each other. We're enlightening each other with our own experiences. And of course, my conversations with the experts that I'm speaking to, but I've learned so much from talking with you and from your experiences. So if you've got great conversations that you want to share with me, or you got a recording and you're recording them, send them my way. Easy to throw on the show. Just a thought. The snow falling. I think we've got an inch in the time I've been talking. So big dump of snow hitting the Northeast. So excited about that. So how about I give you a big dump of news? It's time for the news dump. rapid-fire story that aren't politics, they're not COVID, they're probably undercover, which is why you need to hear them now in the News Dump. You never want to miss the News Dump, brought to you by GiveWell, givewell.org/standup. Sign up for a recurring donation now. All right, let's start in Los Angeles, where there were protests in Dodger Stadium, which is a vaccination site, and it temporarily shut down the people getting vaccinations. That's right. Mass COVID-19 vaccinations were temporarily brought to a halt at a Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles after protesters gathered around the entrance Saturday afternoon. The group represented members of far-right groups as well as the anti-vax community. According to the Los Angeles Times, about 50 people and hundreds who've been waiting in their cars suddenly found the line was brought to a halt when the LA Fire Department closed the entrance to the stadium as a precaution. Protesters were carrying signs that CNN is lying to you, take off your mask, and yelled at those in line not to get the vaccine. So now vaccinations, getting vaccination sites are like Planned Parenthood sites. We're not allowed to get abortions. We're not allowed to get vaccines. Dodger Stadium, according to the AP, one of the largest vaccination sites in America, was reopened after an hour. And the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, tweeted, "We will not be deterred or threatened. Dodger Stadium is back up and running." Then he looked at his face in the mirror for an hour. Hopefully we won't see much more of that, but sadly we might. Now let's head to Russia, where tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets yesterday across Russia to demand the release of the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Nationwide protests have really rattled the Russian government. More than 3,300 people were detained by police, according to one group monitoring this situation. And despite threats of jail terms, warnings to social media groups, and tight police cordons, according to the Associated Press, the protests again engulfed many cities. This is a very important story, I think, to watch what's happening in Russia. Now, let's come back here to Tennessee, where a 70-year-old man, David Vowell, allegedly shot two of his fellow duck hunters, and now he's dead. Two young hunters were killed in Tennessee duck hunting, allegedly by a 70-year-old fellow hunter who confronted them in a lake, reportedly known for all kinds of different altercations, turf wars. Yeah, over what the best prime hunting spot is. And now the suspect is also dead. Cops are investigating the three deaths at Reelfoot Lake State Park, and at least one hunter is talking about how cutthroat the culture of duck hunting is. That's making these horrible tragedies not surprising. Wow. Turf wars for the best duck hunting site. That's pretty horrific. Two duck hunters shot by another duck hunter. Can't we all get along, guys? I mean, we're all just trying to kill ducks together. Man. Let's head to France, where a man tried to repay the village that hid his family in World War II. Eric Schwam is his name. His parents and grandmother arrived in this small French village known for providing refuge, and it helped his family escape religious persecution in 1943. And now the man has left $2 million to this village that hid his family from the Nazis. Read it at The Guardian. Look up Eric Schwam. S-C-H-W-A-M. He wrote that the surprise gift into his will, located on a remote mountain plateau, known for offering shelter to those in need. What a really nice story that I wanted to share with you. All right, let's go to Major League Baseball out of New York. Major League Baseball proposing now a 1-month delay in starting spring training because why? Not enough steroids. Yeah, there's a steroid shortage because of the coronavirus pandemic. No, I'm kidding you. It's the pandemic itself, pushing back opening day to April 28th, according to the Associated Press. Now let's head to Fort Bliss in Texas, where U.S. Army officials are saying 11 soldiers there were sickened after drinking an industrial compound found in antifreeze. Good God! Why did they do that is the question. It's unclear why the soldiers thought what they were drinking was apparently alcohol, but drinking alcohol is prohibited for Army personnel who are on duty. The 11 soldiers became ill. Oh man, that is horrific. Fort Bliss. I guess they thought they were drinking alcohol, but they were drinking poison, which is what alcohol really is. So you should always be careful with it and whoever gives it to you. Let's head to Vermont, where the teacher who created the recycled wool mittens that Senator Bernie Sanders wore to the presidential inauguration, engendering like countless memes, is now partnering with the Vermont Teddy Bear Company to create a whole line of mittens because of the soaring demand, with some of the proceeds going to Make-A-Wish Vermont. How cool is that? Her name is Jen Ellis, and she apparently has been requested to make 18,000 pair of mittens, and now everybody is going to get them. I love this story, and I think it's a great one to end on, except for one more out of Idaho, where a guy apparently has won the lottery 6 times. 6 times! His name is Brian Moss, and he won a $250,000 prize from a scratch game on Thursday, and this apparently is his 6th ever lotto win, but the first top prize and apparently the largest according to the Idaho Lottery. Man, I want to play lottery in Idaho. All right, that is your news dump, ladies and gentlemen, brought to you by GiveWell, givewell.org/standup. Sign up for a recurring donation. Now it's time to get to my first and only guest today. And let me first just say, I think this is the most important issue and why I wanted to talk with him about it this week and today and other experts as well. And it is structural democracy reform. We have to fix what is broken with our democracy. And there's lots of different arguments as to how we do that, but we have to do that first before we can get to all of the other important issues. That's my opinion. You may disagree, but that's why I wanted to talk with today's guest, David Daley, who has written 2 great books that talk about this issue and covered it as a journalist and a reporter. He's a senior fellow for Fair Vote. He's the author of Rat Fucked, the true story behind the secret plan to steal America's democracy. I bet that got your attention, huh? That title, that's what it does, huh? His book that we talk about today is out now on paperback. It's called Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. He is the former editor-in-chief of Salon.com, former CEO and publisher of the Connecticut News Project, a digital media fellow at Wilson Center for Humanities and the Grady School of Journalism at the University of Georgia. His work has appeared in the New Yorker, Washington Post, New York Magazine, The Atlantic, Boston Globe, and so much more. He's been on CNN and NPR, and I'm really excited to have gotten the opportunity to sit down and talk with David Daley yesterday. I think you're going to learn a lot from this conversation. I certainly did. He's on Twitter at DavidDaley3. And we started by talking a little bit about his beat and his work that he has been doing for the last 10, 12 years.
I have really been working on the democracy and voting rights beat for, it goes back to a morning at Salon in which must have been 2013. And we were looking at whatever fresh hell was coming out of the U.S. House that day. I think it was probably the 42nd vote to repeal Obamacare. And I asked a really simple question. It was, why didn't Democrats take back the House in 2012 when we reelected Obama and gained seats in the U.S. Senate? And I couldn't get a good answer to that question. And I started looking around and saw that actually the Democrats won 1.4 million more votes that year, but Republicans still held this 33-seat advantage. And it didn't make any sense. And the more I kept looking at this, the more I realized that this was an intentional Republican operation to win state legislatures in the 2010 election and to then lock in their gains with these rigged maps in state after state, swing states. We're talking about Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania. And it has warped our politics in really serious ways. And at the time that I asked this question, and I said, I think it has something to do with gerrymandering, people looked at me like I was a flat earther, and they said, nah, it's not gerrymandering. That's like something people complained about in the 1790s. It's the big sort now. It's just the Democrats congregate in cities and Republicans are more efficiently spread out. And I said, I don't think so. I think it has something to do with the map making technology and the data and the specificity of what can be done right now. And a little bit later that year, the Shelby County decision comes down and the Voting Rights Act is gutted. That case, 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court essentially undoes Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was preclearance, which meant that all of these states and localities that had a history of racism in their voting practices had to clear any changes that they did with the federal government or with a court in D.C. before making changes.
And it's important just because you brought that up, I want to stop you because I just keep hammering this drum on this podcast, and everywhere I go, I talk about the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, but more specifically, I talk about the fact that the Voting Rights Act was the signature achievement, the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement, Dr. King and John Lewis and so on. And so it was gutted by the Supreme Court, but Democrats have voted to restore it in the House, and now there's a chance to restore it. But I just wanted to just stay on this point because you know so much about it. Before we talk about its effect, how important, because we'll work our way back. How important is this Democracy Restoration Act? I think it's named after John Lewis. What would it do? How important is it if it were to pass and restore? Would it actually restore the Voting Rights Act? What was gutted of it?
The Democrats have got two really important bills in Congress right now. You've got House Bill 1, which is the For the People Act, and that bill does a number of terrific things, including independent redistricting commissions mandated for congressional districts. So it puts an end to gerrymandering at that level. It would require automatic voter registration. It would make online voter registration possible around the country. It would mandate 2 weeks of early voting. It would put an end to voter purges in states. It would end felony disenfranchisement and the Jim Crow era laws that still exist in so many states that keep people from voting if they've got a felony conviction for the rest of their lives. And then you've got House Bill 4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and that would essentially restore Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, these key preclearance provisions that Chief Justice Roberts and the court just eviscerated to such predictable yet depressing ends back in 2013, and really unleashed not only a cyclone of voter suppression across so many states around the country, but it made possible this entrenched and enduring Republican minority rule that I think even after Donald Trump is out of the White House, this is the main problem that we are going to have to find a way to unknot. And if Democrats can work big and structural on democracy reform, they've got the opportunity right now to do something about this. If they miss this opportunity, we are in a heap of trouble.
Now, I think, again, I want to stay here on why, because you just pointed out why this is important, but I want to just highlight that it matters more than everything else, no matter what you care about, whether it be racial equity, climate, guns, healthcare, anything economic, all of those issues that you care about, that we care about, they all happen through our democracy, through us electing people who will fight for what we want. But if we don't have an equal opportunity or equal access to polling, to the polls, to voting, then none of those issues matter. All those things don't matter. So whatever you care about, I appreciate it. We talk about it here on the show, but the issue that you're an expert on that we're talking about right now is the most important issue, and that's why I want people to focus on and think about restoring our democracy, and we can dig into what's broken and actually what has happened, because a lot of progress since your second to last book, Rat Fucked, and you illustrate that in your new book, so I want to talk about that. So just throwing it back to you, how important is this first before everything else I just mentioned?
Democracy reform doesn't have to be your top priority, but no matter what issue you care about, it has to be your first priority, because nothing else is going to be able to move unless if we fix these core structural problems. If we can't ensure equal access to the voting booth, we are going to have this locked in, entrenched Republican minority rule, and it doesn't matter what issue you care about. You're not going to see any progress made. This is where we have to start.
Right. So well said. Doesn't have to be your top, but it has to be your first. I really like that. So you've been writing about this and covering this for a long time now in a number of different publications. And of course, with both of your books, recent books, Rat Fucked, and now your new book, which is now out in paperback. Everybody should go get Unrigged, which is so well reported and so interesting for people to read about the different places in the country that you visited. But let's go back to 2010, if we can, and talk about how you examined what Republicans did, what the strategy was. And it was legal. They were allowed to do it. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean we shouldn't prevent that. But what did they do?
It's an amazing story, because you're absolutely right. It's perfectly legal, but it has reworked our politics. And I don't think you can understand the last decade of American politics without grappling with the extremism that the redistricting cycle set loose on us.
By the way, the way to illustrate the extremism, and again, a great point, you can't understand it without understanding the extremism, is to go down the House Speaker list or go through it, and it kind of is a chart. But if you get if you want to go way back to Newt Gingrich and then Denny Hastert, who is a criminal, both of them are, of course, and then but more recently you go from John Boehner, who skipped town, to Paul Ryan, who then also skipped town, same reason, to now the House caucus, Republican caucus, is made up of the most, I don't like to use fringe or extreme, conspiracy theorists. QAnon is now where they're at. That's the way I illustrate it, and I'm sorry to jump in, but...
No, I think you're right. It's now a sedition caucus. 139 members of the House were willing to vote to overturn free, fair, legitimate elections in Pennsylvania and Arizona that those states certified. That's a majority of the Republican caucus is a sedition caucus. And one of the key reasons why is redistricting and the way that politicians are incentivized and the kinds of people that these districts produce, who are different than the conservatives that these districts produced a decade before.
Yes.
Let me tell the story that I think illustrates this the best. So what Republicans did in 2010 was they launched an operation called Red Map, which is short for the Redistricting Majority Project. They recognized that the 2010 election was going to be incredibly consequential because it's a redistricting year. It's a census year. And as soon as the census numbers come out, all of the state legislatures and congressional districts are redrawn. In about 80% of the states, it's the party that controls the state legislature that controls redistricting. And so Republicans said, what happens if we set out to control all of these legislatures? Essentially, it was Moneyball applied to state politics. The Michael Lewis book about baseball and how the small market Oakland A's beat up on the Yankees and the Red Sox with bigger payrolls. They find the loophole and outthink them. And in this case, the loophole was state legislatures that draw legislative lines and how inexpensive it is to win those local races. And so Republicans did that in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Indiana, Alabama. They take over all of these state legislatures. They draw new lines. Let me take you to North Carolina, though.
And just say, because you know all this, because they told you. You interviewed Republicans. They told you. This isn't David Daley, who's a progressive guy, saying this is what they did. And you interviewed them. You wrote about it in your book. They told you happily. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's absolutely right. And I found it because I found their website that took credit for all of this. And then I found a Karl Rove op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in 2010 that said, we're going to do these three things. And the consequences will be that we will control Congress and state legislatures for the next decade. And Democrats didn't get the newspaper that day, evidently. They fell asleep, and we have all paid a high price. But I mean, I think North Carolina is one of the best examples of what this has unleashed on us. Republicans take over both chambers of the state legislature in North Carolina. They are determined to draw a 10-3 congressional map there so that they control 10 of the 13 seats. They do this by going out to the western mountain part of the state. And there's Asheville, there's hippie vegan Asheville, which is the biggest city in the western part of the state, surrounded by conservative mountain towns.
A lot of art galleries in that hippie town. A lot of art.
There, but if you go out a little bit further, it's the woods where they hit Eric Rudolph. So it's an interesting part of the country.
Yeah, it goes from very progressive right into militia very quickly. Just there's a sign, I think, that welcomes you.
And so that was a swing district, right? You know, it's a really interesting, weird district as a result. All those vegans and
deer hunters,
members.
Vegans and meat eaters, if you wanted to. Yeah. And they killed them themselves. Yeah, it's a diverse district. It's an interesting district to use as an example because. And
so it's a swing district over the years, throughout the 2000s. 2002, 2004. It's a big sort of a George Bush Gulf War district. 2006, 2008. It goes the other way in the Democratic wave. So it's still swinging. And 2010 the Democratic incumbent takes one look at this new map, which essentially drew a line down the middle of Asheville. It cracks Asheville in half. It puts half the hippies in one district, half in the other. And there's not enough of them to elect a member in those districts. They're cracked. They're diluted. They are screwed. The incumbent says, I can't win here. The race becomes on the Republican side. It becomes a newly conservative district. And there's a sandwich shop owner, a local small town sandwich shop owner. His name is Mark Meadows. And he says, I'm going to run for this seat, and I'm going to do this as a birther. And you can go online and you can find him talking about how I'm going to send Barack Obama back to Kenya or wherever it is he comes from. Yep. Meadows wins the primary with 37% of the vote, heads to Washington, where he becomes an immediate thorn in the side of John Boehner.
So he won the Republican primary. He only won a third of Republicans. Is that what you said?
And that was enough.
And then so he becomes a nominee, and then it's a strong red district in the end. The Republican is going to win anyway.
The only race that matters there is the Republican primary. Right. So it becomes this QAnon birther race. Yeesh. And then that person is automatically locked in from what had been a swing district. And then he goes to Washington and he behaves exactly as you might imagine. It's Mark Meadows who files the parliamentary motion to vacate the chair that effectively forces John Boehner out of Congress. Republicans, by drawing lines in this way, they unleashed a Frankenstein's monster on themselves and on the country. They ensured themselves more seats than anybody else, but they also ensured that they could not control the people who were in them, and that the people who were be elected would have no incentive to compromise or to even live in the fact-based reality world.
So well said, but. And I should say that district now, is that 23? I feel like it might be, because Mo Davis tried to take on Mark Meadows, my friend Mo Davis, who's a man of great integrity, former JAG officer, and of course lost. He won the primary, but he lost to this kid, Madison Cawthorn.
That's the Madison Cawthorn district. Yes, that's not Cawthorn.
Ugly Tom Brady, as I call him. He's actually a pretty handsome kid himself. But yeah, so just to illustrate, that district is still very extreme. So then, we're talking really still about rat-fucked and how you explained what red districting was and then what happened as a result. Your new book, which is now out in paperback, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy, is basically progressives saw what Republicans did and said, what can we learn from this? How can we deal with this, and how do we start, especially at the state level, because you've always been very vocal on why state elections, state houses matter so much for so many more reasons, even though certainly the national media doesn't focus as much. So you traveled. What did you do for this book, Unrigged?
When you spend as much time thinking about redistricting and how screwed we are, it can begin to seem oppressive and overwhelming. So I really needed, for my own sake, and also to feel useful, I wanted to get out and tell stories of what people were doing to try to get around this. And it was really incredibly inspiring because there's some amazing victories that were happening. So I went out to Michigan and chronicled the independent redistricting commission that was won in this wildly gerrymandered state. I mean, Democrats have won more votes for the state house in Michigan every year for the last decade, and they've never taken control of the chamber thanks to the maps that were drawn there. And as a result, you can tie that to the Flint water crisis. You can tie that to the anti-labor laws that were passed. You can tie that to horrible election laws. You can tie it perhaps to the 16,000 vote margin that helped Donald Trump carry that state in 2016.
Yeah.
And you had a 27-year-old woman who got up 2 days after the 2016 election and said, I want to do something that might actually make a difference here. She's like, I'm going to take on gerrymandering. And she's like, maybe in this state, and she's already worried about what Thanksgiving is going to be like in her house with Trump voters and Hillary voters and Bernie fans and mashed potatoes in the air. And she's like, everybody should be able to agree that politicians shouldn't be drawing these districts and rendering people's votes meaningless. So she goes onto Facebook and says, I want to fight redistricting in Michigan. Who wants to do this with me? And it turned out that tens of thousands of people wanted to do it with her. And this Facebook post launches a revolution in Michigan, a state in which no constitutional amendment had ever gotten on the ballot without paid petition gatherers. They launched this citizen revolution, tens of thousands of just regular people out collecting signatures. They collect 435 signatures. They get it on the ballot. They beat the Koch brothers. They beat the DeVos family. They beat the Chamber of Commerce, all of which spends millions of dollars trying to knock this off the ballot, trying to fight them in court, and then trying to fight them at the ballot box. And they win with upwards of 60% of the vote. And right now, you've got an independent commission in Michigan that is getting together, and you will have fair districts in place there for the next 10 years because of what started with a Facebook post and what citizens did.
Let's talk about, that's Michigan, and it's a great example. Let's talk about, I really want to talk about, I want to talk about every state that you went to, but people should get the book. But I'd love to get to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida because they're all unique in their ways. But if we could start with Wisconsin, just to talk about how unrepresentative that state house is and how it got that way, I think it's another really important and fascinating state and story.
Wisconsin is perhaps the most gerrymandered state in the nation. Harvard has a project called the Electoral Integrity Project, in which one of the things that they judge is the integrity of your district lines. And on a scale of 1 to 100, the lines in Wisconsin are coming in around a 3 or a 4, which is worse than Venezuela and Iran. So elections are freer and fairer in Iran and Venezuela than they are in Wisconsin, and it's not even close.
Wow.
In 2018, the election there, you had voters in Wisconsin kick out Scott Walker and they replace him with a Democratic governor.
Right.
They reelect a U.S. senator who's a Democrat, Tammy Baldwin. They give Democrats all of the statewide offices, like treasurer and attorney general and all of those. And they give Democratic candidates for the assembly more than 200,000 votes advantage over Republican candidates. Republicans hold on to that assembly 63-36. It's not even close. One seat budges as a result of a 200,000 statewide vote win. It's all because of how they drew those district lines a decade ago. Still endures, still lasts.
And what they did with the power was so egregious. They immediately took away. So they lost. And even though they're such a minority, they took away the power from the guy who won, if I'm not mistaken, the governor, Evers, is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. What you can see in what happens in these gerrymandered legislatures in North Carolina, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, as soon as a Democratic governor comes in, the Republican legislature tries to take away as much power from them as they possibly can. And so if you were paying attention in all of these states over the last couple of years, you saw the roadmap that the national Republicans were going to do. It's this power play. Yeah. As soon as they lose control of the executive, the legislative branch immediately starts claiming those powers for themselves.
I wish that we could just break all this down to the easiest kind of like sports metaphors. Like you rig the game so that you can win. And then even when you lose the game that you rigged, that you cheated in, you somehow go back and change the score, or you injure their star player, at the bar later so that the next game you'll be sure to win. It's like, it's such dishonesty. It's so unfair. It's cheating. And it doesn't seem like that should be a value or a virtue of any type of American, liberal or conservative. Because if we're all sports fans, we all agree that there should be referees and we got to play by the rules. And I wish it could be explained that way so that more folks on the right who are business owners or whatever would just see how unfair it is and how the game is rigged. But I don't know if you have anything like that. Otherwise, maybe we stick with Wisconsin or move on to Pennsylvania, which is also real important.
I think that what you're saying is really important because most Americans view it exactly as you've said. And you can see that from... These are deeply divided states, right? I mean, Michigan is closely divided, and yet more than 60% of voters wanted to have fair elections. Florida is closely divided, and almost 2/3 of voters supported the constitutional amendment there to end felony disenfranchisement. Utah is a red state, and yet voters there voted for independent redistricting. And so what you see is that there really is a common belief that our elections ought to be fair. It's simply the leadership of the Republican Party in all of these states and in Washington that is determined to lock themselves into office and entrench themselves.
But do you think that we need to change the discussion a little bit in terms of all this reporting that you have been doing is so important, and everybody should read what you're writing because it elucidates what the situation is in America and how the system is rigged and how to unrig it and how to make it more fair, more representative. But I wonder if the conversation needs to start to change based on the fact that there are a lot of Americans who just, and this happens throughout the world, throughout human civilization. They don't support democracy anymore. I just saw a video of a woman who said the military needs to overthrow the government and take over because a lot of people respect the military that much, apparently. And there's so much more of that. It's not just one anecdote. And I wonder if you think we need to talk more about history and why democracy matters to those people so that they understand, because you've been doing this great reporting saying we live in a democracy, and now all of a sudden it seems, David, that a lot of people are like, I don't actually want to, though. I want to live in a theocracy or an autocracy or a thing. I don't know what it's called, but I know that my priest runs the town. That's where I want to live. Handmaid's Tale.
I think that we have not grappled enough in this country with what has been a 5-decade operation by conservatives to undermine faith in facts and truth and the news media, and to undercut the authority of institutions that are trying to bring the news in a factual and even-handed way, and then to build institutions of their own that are essentially propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, and lies. And when half of the country is pickled in a sea of disinformation all day long, it is extraordinarily difficult to see how a democracy thrives and survives.
I just thought of a bell jar filled with vinegar and QAnon and Alex Jones, who I just read this morning, David, that he helped fund and organize and bring in the biggest funder of the Stop the Steal rally. He was there and he spoke. He spoke that morning of the Capitol insurrection. And so I feel like there's a lot of mainstream corporate media types who are still giving way too much respect and credence to Republicans in Congress and the arguments being made by them, when in fact Alex Jones is now like one of the most influential folks on the entire right, and the things that they believe are absolutely insane, batshit crazy. It's not, forget about racism. Forget about extreme racism. We're talking about believing things that
space lasers, right?
I get space lasers seems to be the most obvious go-to easy one to say to illustrate how nuts it's become. But also assassinating congressional leaders. Like, they also believe and support some of that stuff. So I don't want to get too far afield on Rick, because I think it's important we talk about.
I think it's all closely tied though,
okay.
Right? Because there were two mobs that day on January 6th, right? There was the mob with the Trump flags that they used to batter the Capitol police officers and then to break their way into the building. And then there was the mob of the House Sedition Caucus that went back into that building 8 hours later and voted to undermine the election results. And that mob is still in the House, you know?
Did that surprise you? Did that vote surprise you that after that event they went? No?
No. I mean, I think that these people are nuts. And I was surprised that it seemed to call back a couple of the U.S. senators. A couple of them seemed to have a pause a moment, but it did nothing.
Mitt Romney seems to be on the, you guys are all crazy. No, you're all crazy. You've all lost your mind. We can't. I lost my election. So you lose sometimes. Like, I feel like that's because what's unique about him, and you mentioned this earlier, but the Utah voters, like, it's such a solid seat for him because he's a Mormon and the Mormon influence and stuff like all that. But
and he pulls up his big boy Mormon underpants and he takes it. Right? I mean, that's just the way it is. But what I think is really important, and I mean, I know this is my go-to move, right? I'm going to say, look at what's happening in the states.
Go ahead.
And while we talk about all of the insanity in the Republican caucus in Congress, you have Michigan, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, all talking about changing the way that they distribute electoral college electors and giving it to the winner of the congressional districts rather than the winner of the statewide districts. And, oh, by the way, they've already gerrymandered all of those congressional districts. So let's keep using Wisconsin as an example, right? Joe Biden wins the state of Wisconsin, but Donald Trump carried 6 of the 8 congressional districts. So what they want to do is give those 6 electoral votes to Trump, the other 2 to Biden, and then you get the 2 electors that represent the 2 U.S. senators. And they say, well, why don't we give those to the person who wins the most congressional districts? So under the way that they want to change the electoral college in Wisconsin, and these are real bills right now, Donald Trump would have won 8 of the 10 while losing the seat. And this is what is underway. It's these efforts in Georgia and Texas to put an end to mail-in voting. It is these efforts to unwind the electoral college. It's these efforts to ban drop boxes. The Arizona state legislature, there is a bill in Arizona right now that says if the legislature wants to decertify the election after the governor and the secretary of state have said it's done, they can do so.
What's that called? There's got to be another word for that.
Great.
The idea that
it's undermining an election. You know, I mean, it
would mean if you have an election, people vote, but then your representatives overturn the vote.
Yeah. So we dodged a bullet in 2020, and they're going to spend the next 3 years making certain that they will be able to pull off a steal next time. And they won't have to do it by dressing up and doing insane cosplay at the Capitol. They'll be able to do it by pointing to the law. They'll be able to say, well, the legislature has the right to do this now, so we're just following the law.
Right. And that's why I wanted to talk about it with you. I mean, I was thinking about our conversation today and thinking about elections and who wants to talk about the midterm elections, much less the next presidential election and so on. But activists, people who want change, anybody who wants to see change and stop just complaining has to pay attention to what is happening, which you have done an award-winning job at covering. And so you say that Republicans are going to spend all this time to make certain and that they can have this unfair effect on the elections and the outcome next time. But you've also documented what the rest, I didn't want to say Democrats and make it even that divisive. There's like the Q people, the corrupt, just insane folks. And then the rest of us are doing what? Because you've also documented great work of so many different grassroots organizations. A lot of people know about Stacey Abrams in Georgia, obviously, because of what happened there with the Senate runoff. But there's a lot of this. So what is the rest of us doing? What can we do? What should we be doing?
Yeah, there's amazing work that can be done. I mean, I went out to Idaho, and I traveled across Idaho, bright red Idaho, where there was a citizen push to try to get Medicaid expansion on the ballot and won because the legislature wouldn't do it because why take Obamacare money that's named after a black man was really their argument. Even though Idaho, deeply rural, all the rural hospitals really needed that money.
It's not just money. I mean, you say it flippantly, like everybody knows, too, but it's so important that the federal government was going to give Idaho money to cover people with insurance. They were going to give it. And I think 13 other states as well said no, rejected it. And
no, thanks. And so these citizens,
because it would have made those people's lives better, just to be clear, because punishment is the reason. It would have made their lives better, and they would have now had something. And once you give somebody something, you can't take it away, which is also true. But it was simply about increasing health insurance coverage in the state of Idaho, paid by other people, and they said no. I'm sorry, but I feel like you didn't give enough weight on that.
I think that's exactly right.
So you learned what?
Well, when they put this on the ballot, it passes in Idaho with 63% of the vote.
The Medicaid expansion.
A Medicaid expansion. So it's not just Democrats who are doing this. It's not just progressives. It is people in red states who are frustrated with the same unresponsive, insulated, one-party, insane QAnon government that is not getting things done for them. I walked up a driveway in Idaho Falls one day with these two activists who are working on this issue, and there's a bumper sticker on a car that says, "Vietnam, we were winning when I left." And I'm thinking to myself, hey, maybe we ought to go next door because this guy doesn't want to talk to us about Obamacare.
Oh, God.
And they ring the doorbell and the guy comes to the door and he's got this crazy shirt on. It looks like the opening of the old Colbert Report with the crazy screaming eagle flying down at you.
I'm familiar with it. I was the warm-up comedian there for 6 years. I watched it every night. Yeah. Memorized that. They actually asked me to model that at first. It was actually my torso. Anyway, this is what he looks like, this guy. Yeah. He opens the door. There you are.
And I'm thinking, we're going to die in Idaho Falls. And he says, oh, yeah, my whole family falls in this donut and we don't have any health care as a result.
Right.
So I'm with you and I'm going to vote for this. And if that guy was driving down the highway and I saw his bumper sticker, I would have sped up not to let him in, right? When you knock on his door and talk to him, he's on your side on this issue.
And he'd have done the same to you. And that's the point, is when you actually tell people about a policy and what it would do for them, as opposed to demagogue it in media and so on, we get a lot more agreement and alignment. And that's a great illustration right there. This guy who you would think, and probably is, all the way over here on most things. But when you explain to him, no, this means you get pie every day. You get to eat pie. We'll eat pie. We'll have pie every day. You're telling me I get pie? Yeah, we get to have pie now. Everybody gets the pie. Do you want any pie or not? Yes, I want it. Okay. But how did... that's a referendum in Idaho. You also have a chapter about Florida and what Desmond Meade did with a referendum there. You're also, either now or still a fellow at Fair Vote. You have ideas on how the system can be changed. And I wonder about these referendum votes, whether it be on marijuana, felonies regaining their right to vote, Medicaid expansion, or renewable energy efficiencies and so on. Are they a good idea? Are they democratic? Do you generally support them? How do they get rigged? Referendum votes.
Oh, boy. Yeah, every time you try to be optimistic, the other side comes around and does something to... but that is, I think, the warning. I mean, so there's all these victories in Idaho, in Florida, in Michigan, and these gerrymandered legislatures, they come back and they say, okay, we're going to take away your right to do an initiative. Or they say, we're going to interpret this initiative that you very clearly mean to allow 1.4 million people who have a felony conviction to vote again. We're going to add that, well, they've also got to pay all the fines and fees attached.
So there's a referendum in Florida. They vote over 3/4 almost of people vote for a thing. Yeah. They vote for a thing, and then the Republicans in the legislature say, I know that most of you voted for this thing to change that. And the thing was that people, had served their time, could vote. But we're now going to say they still can't unless they pay off their fees. And then I think Michael Bloomberg swung in. He's like, I'll pay them. But the point is, they undercut the referendum. They just passed another law, regulation. Is the point you're making about why they might sometimes not work if the legislature is willing to cheat and fuck everybody over?
1.4 million people were supposed to get their voting rights back. 31,000 were able to actually vote.
Is that
in the 2020 election?
Oh, I never heard that statistic.
That's the rat fuckery that the Florida legislature pulled off, right?
Oh, God, it's so... We have to take a moment in this interview for my rage to subside. Okay.
The voters of Florida tried to end a Jim Crow vestige. And the Florida legislature said, hold my beer, I've got a poll tax for you. And that's effectively what they did. So I think that what this comes back to is what we were talking about at the top, which is that if Democrats do not take the moment that they have right now to get serious about structural democracy reform, the advantages that Republicans have in state legislatures, in the U.S. Senate, in the Electoral College, and that they have now built onto the courts are going to lock in Republican minority rule for a generation. And we have this moment where we have the presidency and both chambers in Washington, and we've got to take full advantage of it now, because if we don't, it's going to pass. And the 2022 Congress will be drawn by these state legislatures that, know.
What does structural democracy reform look like to you? There's a lot of very interesting ideas, and we talk about I think it's important to talk about the pragmatic politics of the way that the vote is, and no one seems to be able to have a good answer as to how you win over Joe Manchin and maybe Kristen Sinema to get rid of the filibuster, to do some of these things that I think you're probably going to tell me you think are needed for structural democracy reform the way you see it. Someone recently suggested you got to give them some pork. Well, we don't have earmarks anymore. It's not really a thing, even if it's an option. I say we bring those back. So I'm not sure what that looks like, what you can give them, because the system has been changed in that. So what does structural democracy reform look like, and what do you think realistically we can get done, and how do we get there?
There's a lot of forms that structural democracy reform can take, and
probably like a 2-hour conversation right there, right?
Yeah, and some of it is winnable, and some of it is going to take more time. Some of it we can do easily by passing a law. Some of it is going to require more work. A lot of what is in the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Is that HB 1 and 4?
That's 1 and 4. Gets us a pretty good chunk of the way there. If you've got independent districts drawing congressional lines, if you've got automatic voter registration and same-day voter registration, you can do a lot of good things. If you can block the purges in states, that is progress. If you can require 2 weeks of early voting and also require that states open up an equitable number of places all over the state and have the same number of machines in all of these places. If you can make it just as easy for people to cast an early vote in Mississippi as it is in Oregon, then you have made progress. Now, I think you've got to make more progress than that. I think we have to think long and hard about what we do with the Supreme Court that has been packed by Republicans over the course of the last 20 years. And 5 of the 6 conservatives on a 9-member court have been appointed by a president that did not win the popular vote.
Such an important point.
We have got to think about
and confirmed by a Senate.
And confirmed by a Senate in which right now it's a 50-50 Senate, but the 50 Democrats represent 41 million more people.
I love that I said that, left a blank, and you filled it in. Now we're dancing. And confirmed by a Senate, and I wasn't sure what the number and statistic and smart point was to make, and you picked it right up. Yeah, I mean, it's such an important issue right there. So what about, so you're talking about the Supreme Court.
The Senate has to be repaired as well. Yeah. I mean, if we do nothing in the U.S. Senate by somewhere in between 2030 and 2040, you are going to have 70% of the Senate representing 30% of the population. And that is going to be a veto power of the smallest, reddest of tiny states. And it's going to make any progressive change virtually impossible. It's going to be a tyranny of the minority veto power. So the kind of work we have to do with the Electoral College, I mean, Joe Biden wins the popular vote by 7 million, and it looks like he has this comfortable 306-232 Electoral College win. In reality, if you switch 10,000 votes in Georgia, 6,000 votes in Arizona, 7,000 votes in Wisconsin, you've got a 269 tie, which it turns out is not nice.
Which makes it sound I've heard people describe it that way, which makes it sound like it was close. It wasn't close. It was an 8 million vote difference, but because of the Electoral College, it was close, and that's what you're illustrating. But just sometimes people hear that the wrong way. I'm like, wait, I thought it was big. It was a huge win.
Yeah, it was a huge win. But the Electoral College almost tipped it the other way. And we all freaked out in 2016 when a 3 million vote margin in the popular vote went the other way in the Electoral College. You almost had a 7 million margin go the other way at this time. We've got to think about the Electoral College. We've got to think about the Supreme Court. We've got to think about the U.S. Senate. We've got to think about redistricting in the U.S. House. And we have to think about state legislatures. And progressives are going to be on the defense in all of those arenas for a long period of time moving forward. And there are big structural things that we can do. And then there are other more creative things, right? I mean, why can't we build, if Tom Steyer or Michael Bloomberg wants to do something meaningful, how about instead of lighting hundreds of millions of dollars on fire in a presidential run fueled by ego, why don't you build a giant research university somewhere close to the border of Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota, and bring students there, and let's affect the population of these states in a serious,
who's talking about this idea? I haven't heard this idea much, but the idea of you turn a state a different politics by moving into that state, living and voting and organizing in that state. Are there really serious ideas or movements around that? Because I like your idea that a billionaire places a job or a school that would bring, rational people who live in reality and support things like science in to live and vote. That's a fascinating idea. Have we seen, where has that actually happened? Has that ever happened in America, even where someone purposely said, I'm going to put this university or, Apple Computer, a headquarters? I mean, they usually do it for tax reasons, I would feel.
I think that's right. But the taxes are probably pretty good in those states. Why does, if Jeff Bezos is looking for a new Amazon spot, instead of going to Washington, D.C. and New York City, how about, open up in Grand Junction, Colorado, and actually do something to affect those four.
David, why can't we just let some of those states go? Why can't they just go? You guys can go. Or can't we just give Texas away? And I know there's a lot of great progressives and cool people in places there, but can't they have it?
That would be fine. It can be part of our great hipster relocation march of 2022.
Well, listen, I did. If you have like 2 more minutes, I just did want to ask about voter ID. You have a great chapter in your new book about in Unrigged, and I think it's a super important issue. And I feel like we just have to talk about just in terms of the importance of a lot of the courts and a lot of Republican secretaries of state as well, holding the line on things. And when it came to like Chris Kobach in Kansas and the voter ID fraud myth, I mean, that's, I think, an important story. But I also think that that's still an argument that a lot of folks are susceptible to, that, hey, listen, if you need an ID to buy beer, then you need an ID to vote. And you say, well, it's not in the Constitution. There shouldn't be any obstacles to voting. And then you say, and it makes it harder for certain, people to vote, black folks, and other folks who aren't, even rural folks. And they say, well, then they make a personal responsibility. Everybody should have to get an ID. And I just want to know your take on that argument and what you write about in this chapter of your new book, Unrigged, because, it's a really important point, and you write very well about it here.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it sounds like common sense, right? I need an ID to buy Sudafed. So why is it wrong to show an ID to vote? Well, we actually do have a problem with people buying Sudafed to make meth. And we don't have a problem with people voting without an ID.
And why, as a conservative, do you want to create a new expensive regulation for government, a new piece of red tape for a problem that doesn't exist, as you just said?
It's a problem that doesn't exist, and the solution for the problem that doesn't exist actually creates the problem that it says it wants to fight.
Yeah, it does. Well said.
And it's maddening. And Kobach, who was the Secretary of State in Kansas and who is kind of the leading conservative proponent of these bills, is such an interesting guy because he insists on these laws, and yet at every turn, reality steps in and sort of smacks him in the face. He would say, well, we need this because there's dead people voting. And he'd have a press conference and say, this person is dead and they voted. And the press would all go over to that person's house. And one of the people he said was dead, they found him cutting his lawn. And he's like, oh, yeah, that was my dad. And my dad is dead, but I'm here cutting my lawn. I don't think this is heaven. It's a hot day in Kansas. And so this is what you bump up
now
against.
They're saying animals voted. Really?
Animals voted.
I really heard a woman say it. Yeah.
It's just not the case. And what is so... If everybody had an ID, it would be one thing to say, okay, everybody has to show their ID to go and to vote. But Republicans want to insist on ID to vote. And then they do this research into the specific forms of ID that the people who they don't want to vote are least likely to have.
Right. Well,
so this is what they do in North Carolina.
People always forget this detail. You need an ID to register to vote. You move into a new town to register. You need an ID. So then now you're a voter in this town. Now, when you show up, you don't need the ID, but you have proven that you live or work in that town. And of course, even if you hadn't, even if there was these very few examples, the question is always, did it affect the outcome of any election, a local, state, or national election? And the answer, of course, to that is no, and even more so in 2020. I mean,
there are hundreds of millions of votes that have been cast in this country over the last a decade, and the number of cases of voter impersonation, it's a couple dozen.
And where it was fraudulent, where it was rigged, it was almost always Republicans doing
almost
it.
Always,
you read about.
And it's hundreds of millions of votes. Republicans use this as a phony issue to make it harder for people who they don't want to vote to vote. Because they will require forms of ID that they know Democrats, young voters, voters of color don't have. Then they will make it more difficult for them to get those IDs, as they did in Alabama, by closing the driver's license offices in the Black Belt after requiring that, or as they did in Wisconsin by simply making sure that the State Department of Motor Vehicles did not have the necessary forms that the legislature mandated to give people the IDs that they needed to vote. And then they make other exceptions that make it possible and really easy for their voters to vote, like saying in Texas, a gun license works just fine. So this is yet another big lie.
In Arkansas, if you brought a raccoon pelt, you were allowed to vote, which I thought was really how is that even proof that you killed it? You could have bought that at a hobby shop. Okay, before I let you go, what is there any action that listeners should take? And I do want to say, in reading your book, I thought I really would love to do something with the community I've built around this program, and I would love to focus in on one or two places, but instead, so often I think people get excited, and there have been a lot of great organizations created as a result of Trump's election, and really helped, as you read about, and the midterm elections and so on. I think so often people are like, I'm gonna make this anti-gun organization or something, but I think maybe sometimes it serves to step back and say, wait, is there already an organization doing this work that I can join and help support, as opposed to maybe compete with? So what action can we take, and what maybe could I do with our community to help restore, support structural democracy reform?
There's a lot of great groups working on this. I work for one of them called Fair Vote, which does terrific work. I think the Campaign Legal Center is doing fantastic work as far as filing all the lawsuits around the country. The ACLU's Voting Rights Project has won amazing victories. If you look at the people who are organizing in states, who are organizing in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama and Texas, they could use your help. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund does sensational work. The Brennan Center at New York University is doing the research that shows the impact of these voter ID bills at the state level and tracks them all around the country. There are lots and lots of people doing fantastic work who would love your support in this moment.
And is it a good thing to really get hyper local and look at your local community and what, maybe a group of folks are doing in that local community on Facebook or an email gathering? Is that also a good place to start?
Yeah, I think that works. You know, I mean, there are just so many good examples right now of people who met on Facebook, organized on Facebook, and built it into a real campaign that made serious and lasting change in their states. So thanks, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, that's one good thing. I mean, I was thinking about, as you said, you know, using Facebook for good right there. You know, the thing about Facebook is it helps people that live in a local area connect digitally. If there were another platform, I'm all for it. Let's support it. But that's a great place for people to start.
See you later on Parler, Pete.
Yeah, let's head over to Parler. That just reminded me of my live read. If you love Twitter but hate that you can't be super racist, join Parler, which will be right back in a month or so. Are they back? I actually don't know. David Daley, what a pleasure to catch up with you and really to research and dig into all of your work to prepare for this interview. The new book is so great, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. If you really care about reforming our democracy, it's now out in paperback. You absolutely should buy it. And follow David on Twitter. All the links, I'm going to include all the links to what you just said, those organizations, Fair Vote, ACLU, Brennan, NAACP, etc., in this show. And I really appreciate you joining me so much, David. It's great to catch up with you. Let's do it again soon, because there's going to be continuing a lot to talk about.
Anytime at all. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it.
Okay, that's David Daley, who is the author of Rat Fuck, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, How Americans Battled Back to Save Democracy, the ex-editor-in-chief of Salon.com. He's on Twitter at Dave Daley 3, D-A-L-E-Y, the number 3. And I thoroughly enjoyed that hour-long conversation, learned a lot from him. I've learned a lot from reading his books, and I certainly do believe that while it might not be your top priority, it does need to be your first priority, structural democracy reform in the United States of America. I learned so much from that. I hope you appreciated it. Thank you very much for joining me on today's podcast. I wanted to make this week Climate Week, but I got that idea at the end of last week, and so I'm going to try to make it happen next week. How about that? Need a little bit more preparation. I can't be just so impulsive as to take an idea and immediately implement that idea. But thank you very much for all of those of you that got excited about it. I'm going to try to make that happen for next week. All right, that's it. Out of time for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to all of the new subscribers. Sign up to support this podcast, which is free, but not cheap at all. Right now, go to the paid subscription link in the show notes or patreon.com/standupwithpete. Take it away, John Carroll.
Your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. The place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
I like to take naps during the day. I can't anymore. I got myself a job, but on the weekends I'll take a nap. You ever take a nap during the week and you feel you have this like underlying sense of guilt? And the phone rings and wakes you up at 2 on a Wednesday, and you have to pretend that you weren't sleeping. You have to rehearse your wide awake voice before. And if the phone rings, you're like, oh shit, hello. Pick up the phone and end up saying some shit you were dreaming about. You're like, what? No, I was just getting chased by a sausage.